When I was a kid, I wanted a dog so badly that I would rent out this one, or sorry, I would borrow this one book from the library that showed all these different breeds. And I would look and stare and try to manifest before manifesting was a thing that a dog would just magically appear. Now, like a lot of South Asian families, my mom was not having it. She was like, absolutely not. And she was probably right. Now that I know how much care these little fur balls actually require, I probably wouldn't have been able to adequately take care of one. However, the interesting thing and why I'm bringing this up and starting the video here with my little guy today is because sometimes the things we think are going to heal our inner child end up first harming us a little bit. So when I first got this guy, all of a sudden I had a flood of repressed memories from my childhood just swoop in one great big sweep, and it was very overwhelming. So much so that I had a hard time developing a secure attachment and healthy bond with my little puppy here. Since then, we've done our repair and our healing, but it's interesting to note that sometimes the things that we think are going to help us and soothe us first kind of jostle things up a little bit and things get a little messy. So think about yourself when you were a kid. What were the things that you used to like playing, doing, watching, listening to, reading? Those are going to be the portals for starting the dialogue as to where the healing needs to happen. Today, I want to talk about different types of inner child wounds that are relevant specifically to the South Asian community. And I started it off with my little puppy because that's who started off my healing journey. Being a South Asian therapist means that there's a certain pattern or theme of topics that come up. Now, one of the main themes that comes up is that we've had childhood trauma. There's been wounds that have gone on because, unbeknownst to our parents, usually it's not with the intent, they've made some blunders. So, accidentally, sometimes parents do this list of things. Sometimes a multiple array of them can be checked off for you. Sometimes it's just one or two of them, or maybe none of them. And that's pretty acceptable and common as well. But if you relate to this list here, then maybe stay tuned for what I'm about to say. Number one, parentification. Parentification is when a child starts to take on extra roles or responsibilities that are kind of above their pay grade, so to speak. This can come down to sibling care, financial responsibilities, sometimes in our community being the family translator, helping our parents with their finances, their health, their medical appointments, taking care of the younger siblings, so on and so forth. Household chores, massive one in our community. And now, why parentification is unhealthy and potentially damaging is because, one, it creates resentment because we're robbed of our youth. We don't get to have our innocence protected. Role reversals can even go so far as to the parentified child becoming their caregiver's counselor, their caregiver's referee in marital disputes. So they're exposed to a lot of mature topics early on in life, which means they're not getting the chance to devote resources to the parts of the brain that need the attention at that time, like play and freedom to explore and curiosity. All that innocence, that youth-like energy is kind of robbed of them. And so it's a very serious wrongdoing that has repercussions in adulthood, because sometimes if we have been overburdened with responsibility in childhood, then we really run away and flee from it in adulthood, and we almost have this repulsion to anything that emulates or reminds us of those strong responsibilities, obligations, and duties. Sometimes because they're so burnt out from taking this role on in their family, it blocks them from being able to create healthy relationships with anyone from outside of the family. They can also develop strong stress responses, which puts the nervous system under a lot of duress, and often these symptoms end up manifesting as hair loss, headaches, appetite regulation issues, either overeating, comfort food eating, or appetite suppression. It also doesn't allow for emotional regulation to develop because the parentified child is so fixated and focused on prioritizing their parents' needs that their own needs become unnoticed and thrown on the back burner, which, of course, as you can imagine, has its own vast array of consequences. It can also really impact our self-worth development because there's a kind of subliminal message being sent that we're not worthy of receiving our parents' protection and care and attention, and that we have to be the ones giving that instead. So there's a lot of missing boxes that aren't getting checked off, and that kind of messes with our identity and worth and value in the world. And we feel like in order to be accepted and loved, we really have to be contributing or providing some sort of value or helping and assisting those around us. It creates a little bit of a conditional love dynamic in our brains, which of course can show up later on in life in our romantic relationships. Before we move forward, if anything that we have discussed feels relevant to you and it feels like I'm hitting the nail on the head, this is an ample opportunity to heal your parentification wound, to heal that role reversal wound, and at last give your inner child that nurturing and gentleness and unconditional love. And of course, that can be attained and achieved through counseling therapy. That's not the sole way it can be done, but it's just a little bit more efficient rather than doing self-healing or kind of trying to navigate things on your own. Now, branches off of parentification is being the family accountant or the family counselor. Now, why this can be damaging is because the stress that comes on to you once you realize maybe the finances aren't quite up to par, and the stress of your parents having expectations from you to use technology that they might not have been well versed in when you were growing up, such as doing their online banking or being the translator in in-person banking situations, can really put a lot of pressure on the brain and nervous system of the developing child. It also makes a great big impact in our development with the relationship with money and finances. And sometimes if there's been scarcity in youth and we were overexposed to that fact and maybe debt and things like that, it can really wreak havoc on how good we are with money going forward in adulthood. The second thing that I mentioned was being the family counselor. Now, for obvious reasons, this is inappropriate. It's a boundary violation because children shouldn't be placed in the middle of their parents' disagreements. They shouldn't be the referee, and there's a lot of fear involved. It's very unfair for a parent to place that type of expectation on for their child to be the one that heals their wounds, for the child to be the one that sorts out their conflict. This can also branch off into sometimes parents have had their own traumas and they try to vicariously heal themselves through the child that they deem the counselor or their healer, and they're kind of projecting and displacing all these unhealed wounds onto that kid, which again is a lot of pressure. If any of this sounds relevant to you, just kind of taking notes as we're going through this and trying to jostle your memory and being like, hey, I think that was going on for me. And of course, this isn't set in stone. Our brains are very malleable. They're like Play-Doh. So what's been done can be undone. And just it's about finding the right techniques to do so. Now we're going to pivot and we're going to talk about something a little bit more serious, and that is the wound of being neglected. Now, neglect can come in the form of physical neglect. We're not getting appropriate amounts of food, maybe shelter. We're not being let in to our home after walking home from school. We've come home to doors are being locked, or not appropriate clothing. We don't have winter jackets or outgrowing our clothing. But then there's also emotional neglect, which is just as damaging. So emotional neglect means always being gaslit, a parent telling you, what do you have to be sad for? You have everything. Or a parent failing to notice when you're struggling or stressed out. A lot of the time, can be unintentional because they're so burnt out from being immigrant parents and trying to make a living that they just don't have the bandwidth to notice, but also it's hard for them to give something that they never received. So it's an intergenerational pattern of not being able to fill their offspring's emotional needs. Neglect wound is something that is quite deep rooted and requires a different approach in terms of therapy. But if this sounds relevant to you, again, it's important to reach out to a practitioner in your area. The last thing we're going to talk about, the wound of being abused. Now, trigger warning, the things I'm going to talk about here are very upsetting and activating, but every now and then, people become parents who should not be parents. So they have malicious intent. Perhaps they have narcissistic tendencies, sociopathic tendencies. They lack the EQ, they lack the trait of empathy, and they project their wounds and traumas and negative energy onto their children through using physical force or sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or verbal abuse. If this is happening to you or anyone you know, tell a trusted adult. Please tell someone, tell a teacher, tell a friend, tell somebody who is going to get you support, because there are lots of resources out there to better your situation, and you do not deserve to be going through that. Even if we hold understanding for why a parent might be the way that they are, perhaps they had their own traumas, nothing justifies abuse. That's a very black and white situation. We do not ever try to hold space for tolerance when it comes to abuse. So I just want to be clear that a lot of the time I speak in a very empathetic and understanding and gentle way, but there's a line. And that line comes when our physical safety, mental safety is being impacted. If that is something you have endured, again, somatic therapy can be very helpful for this, because the wounds of abuse are typically physical. And so our relief has to be through a physical means, which is what somatic therapy is all about. I know I spoke very fast throughout this video, and that's because I usually record these little TikToks in between sessions. I also know that it's hard to pay attention when someone's blabbing on for more than 5 minutes. I hope you found this informational and helpful. And of course, I am always here to point you in the right direction if you're looking for a certain kind of practitioner, or if you want to have a consultation with myself. Just email me at contact@therapycovecounseling.com. See you next time.